We're going to hopefully finish up Paul's travels this morning. There's not much left to go, but I don't know. I thought we ought to finish it out since we got this far, getting him to Rome at least. We left off, we were talking about the reason for the letter. Paul's in Ephesus. This is the third campaign, third missionary tour, some people refer to it. He stayed in Ephesus for 2 years and 3 months, at least, perhaps a little longer than that. During this time, he accomplished a great deal in the area of teaching. But while he was there, he received information from Corinth, where he had been on his last campaign. He spent 18 months there then, and I suppose they knew he was coming to Ephesus, and they corresponded with him perhaps twice. He may have written 2 letters while he was there. I kind of lean towards this time when he came in 54. He could have written a letter when he was there in 52. I think it's more reasonable to think he was there. He wrote that letter in 54. It's the letter that we don't have a copy of. But he refers to it that he had written to him previously in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and he had given them certain information. When he arrived in Ephesus in 54 would have been an opportune time to have written that letter. Now we're talking about 2 Corinthians, which is written at the end of his stay in Ephesus. He's been there now for over 2 years. And he lists 2 reasons at least for writing this particular letter. It has been declared to me concerning you, my brethren, by those of Chloe's household, that there are contentions among you, divisions. There were groups, little sectarian groups. Denominationalism, just all under one building is what it came down to. You had this group over here and this group over there. And they had different ideas about who their leader was. Some thought it was Paul. He was the chief man. Some thought it was Peter. That's the examples he uses. But what was going on at Corinth, it's interesting to note, after the church was born at Corinth, how quickly the false teachers came in. It was a really short period of time, and the false teachers had come in. If I was Satan, that's the way I would strike. I would strike as quickly as possible. When Jesus was baptized by John the Baptizer, the devil immediately put him to the test 3 times. If you're going to fall at the beginning of your ministry is the most likely time before you build any experience, before you get toughened up to it, whatever. And Satan struck while the iron was hot. Well, I think he did that in Corinth too. And that's something that I think it's very important for us to be aware of, especially in the realm of mission works. Is that whenever we establish a church somewhere, a congregation, the devil's going to come beating on the door pretty quick. He's going to try to take advantage of the church while it's at its weakest point. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to protect the churches that are established for a pretty good period of time. Back then, they could receive spiritual gifts, which we can't give now. We have to have somebody there who can both teach and protect the church. That's why, like in India, for example, it's so important when a church is established to get a preacher in there, someone who can keep his eye on what's going on. And if any problems arise, you can stop it right there from the get-go and maybe avoid it. Well, the problems arose at Corinth because there were these false teachers, And they had all kinds of ideas, and they were espousing. And because their ideas were different, you had this group, that group, and the other group. And they were contentious with one. They were at war with one another. They were at odds with one another over their theology, their doctrine. And that caused a lot of problems within the church. And of course, that was bad for the church. It was bad for the community. It was just bad all the way around. Well, somebody from Chloe's house had gotten in contact with Paul and told him about it. So he got to write 1 Corinthians. That's one of the reasons. In chapter 7, he says, concerning the things of which you wrote to me. Apparently, they sent him another letter with their questions because there were so many different teachings being taught. They thought it necessary to get answers to their questions. So beginning with chapter 7, Paul starts dealing with questions that he was asked, and he answered them. And every time Paul said something, it just created more problems. Finally, when you get to the time of 2 Corinthians, you got some of the problems are worked out. Perhaps the biggest single problem, the man who had his daddy's wife, they had that worked out by the time he wrote 2 Corinthians. But other problem they had, and probably the worst problem of all, was the fact that they were challenging Paul's apostleship. He's not really an apostle. He said he was, but he's not. Now, I'm an apostle, not Paul. I know what truth is, not Paul. Paul taught you this, this, and this. That's just not true. And now they want clarification. And they ask the questions, what is the truth? And Paul responds to those questions. Now, when you get to 2 Corinthians, what he'll do on 2 Corinthians is he'll deal heavily with false teachers and false teachings. He makes it crystal clear what has to be done. False teachers are not to be ignored. You're not supposed to turn your head the other way. You've got to confront them face to face. And that's what Paul did and what he would continue to do. You have to shut them down and shut them up. You can't let them keep teaching the things that they're teaching because it doesn't harmonize with the will of God. Sometimes people are a little bit too sensitive for such things, but this is the biblical way of doing things. This is the Christ way of doing things, and it's the way that things ought to be done. You have to make sure, irregardless of the human cost, you have to make sure that church is what it's supposed to be, and let God take care of it after that. You know, it's his church. And that was the reasoning behind 1 Corinthians, according to what Paul said. And it's important to understand that when you read the letter, because then you can understand why he's saying the things he's saying and what he means by it. In chapter 16, as he's signing off, verses 5 through 11, he said, I will come to you when I pass through Macedonia. He's in Ephesus. His plan is to go up to Troas, most likely, and go across and come down through Philippi, Thessalonica, down through Berea, and all the other small places that are in Macedonia, and eventually work his way down to Corinth. That's his plan. But, you know, sometimes the best laid plans of mice and men, you know, they get messed up somewhere along the line. But that's what happened to Paul. His plans got messed up some. But that was his plan. They were accusing him of being afraid to face them. The false teachers were. He keeps saying I'm coming. He never comes. He says he will, and he don't. He said, I will come, he's saying. I just don't know when for sure. I'm passing through Macedonia as I'm in Ephesus. This is his intent, is to pass through Macedonia. It may be that I will remain or even spend a winter with you, in which he did. That you may send me on my journey wherever I go. That'll be in the spring, which they did. That part kind of worked out all right. For I do not wish to see you now on the way. I do not wish to see you now. 1 Corinthians was a scathing letter. It no doubt hurt their feelings. We had a lot of harsh things to say, and I think he wanted to give them time to cool down. Let them read the letter, think about it, chew on it a little bit. But I don't want to talk to you right now. We'll wait a while for that, and then we'll deal with what I've talked about. But when it's time, I hope to stay a while with you if the Lord permits. But I'm going to tarry right here in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a great and effective door has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. A lot of opportunities to make converts here in Ephesus. He didn't want to leave too quick. He wanted to bring in as many people as he could. But he said, if Timothy comes, see that he may be with you without fear, for he does the work of the Lord as I also do. Without fear. He's afraid that when Timothy came, they might do bad things. So he's telling the Corinthians, you protect this boy and make sure he doesn't get hurt. So more than likely, Timothy is the one who's going to carry 1 Corinthian letter to Corinth. Okay? But he'll be there, he'll talk to you, he'll give you the letter, and I want him to leave because he thinks it could be a bad place for him to be. Let no one despise him, but send him on his journey in peace, that he may come to me, for I am waiting for him with the brethren. And they'll meet up again in Macedonia. It'll be a few months before they meet up. Here's where we're supposed to begin. Timothy is kind of out of the picture for a little bit. He's going through Macedonia. He's preaching too. He may have went to Athens and preached for a little bit. We don't know where he went until he gets up with Paul. But this would have had Paul writing the letter, 1 Corinthians, early in 57. He had arrived there in 54 A.D., and he wrote the letter in the early part of the year 57. We know this because of the event that took place at that time. Chapter 9 of Acts says, about that time there arose a great commotion about the way, about the church. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith who made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. And Paul was messing it up. Well, I better go back. Paul was messing it up because he was teaching one God, which makes Diana a fraud. People stopped buying that junk. And of course, Demetrius and the craftsmen were losing money, so they're upset. And they have a riot, and they have a big commotion. They want to get their hands on Paul, and if they did, they probably would have killed the man. It was a great fervor in Ephesus. It's written in secular history. It's on the documents of the city, I guess city council or whatever. But they had this recorded in their history books as well, about Demetrius raising such a stink over Paul the Apostle. And Paul had to leave town. Now, according to Acts, after the uproar had ceased, Paul called the disciples to himself. He embraced them, and he left to go to Macedonia. Now, when he had gone over that region and encouraged them with many words, he came to Greece. Okay? There's no remarks about him going to Troas or Macedonia in Acts. When he had gone over that region and encouraged them with many words, that's all it says about what took place in Paul's journey to Corinth that year. But in Corinthians, we read about some of the things that took place along the way. And I want to go over that with you for a moment. First, we know that Paul went to Troas. This would have been his way to go anyhow, but he had to leave immediately. And when he arrived in Troas, he said, when I came to Troas to preach Christ's gospel, there was a door open to me by the Lord. Now, keep in mind, 1 Corinthians is already gone. It may be in the hands of the Corinthian people by this time. So now Paul's writing 2 Corinthians. He's in Macedonia when he writes it. It's in the latter part of 57. Same year he wrote 1 Corinthians. So these letters aren't too far apart. Furthermore, I came to Troas to preach Christ's gospel. A door was opened to me by the Lord there in Troas. So what does he do? He's got to sit still and he's got to start preaching the gospel because people are coming to Christ. But I had no rest in my spirit because I did not find Titus my brother. He thought Titus would have been back by now. Apparently, Paul had sent Titus to Corinth. And I suppose, and that's the best I can give you is a suppose, I suppose it was his responsibility to come back and let Paul know how the people received the letter, how they reacted to it, responded to it. And he was looking for Titus, and he's worried because he doesn't know what they might have done to that boy. So he's in a strait between two, as he would say. He had to stay in Troas because he was making disciples, but he wanted to go find Titus and find out what happened to him. But taking leave of them, finally he decided, I've got to go. I can't imagine what kind of turmoil he was in. He's like a general in the military. He's sending men here and there and yonder, and he doesn't know what's going to happen to them. You know, you hope they always come back safe without harm, but they might be harmed, and if they are harmed, you know you're going to feel the guilt yourself because you're the one that sent them. And here's Paul. That's the situation he's in, and he's tore all the pieces over it. Indeed, when we came to Macedonia, our bodies had no rest there. In Macedonia, we were troubled on every side. Outside were conflicts, inside were fears. Now, this was partly due to the Jews, of course, who were a thorn in their sides all the time anyway. But it was also due now to Demetrius and the craftsmen. And their long arm reached out and touched the craftsmen in Macedonia. So wherever Paul went in Macedonia, he's facing all kinds of opposition. Every town he went to, he said, we got no rest. We're constantly troubled. Conflicts and fears. It's just one right after another. It wasn't a good experience the man was living through. Well, Paul had left Troas and made his way into Macedonia, and there's a lot of churches he can preach at in Macedonia, but the three most popular churches are Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea. And more than likely, and this is again just a guess, he was in one of these places long enough to write 2 Corinthians. Now, most scholarship says he wrote it while he was at Philippi. I don't think that's the case, and I'll explain as we go a little farther. A lot of scholars believe it was in Thessalonica because he had a great desire to go to Thessalonica. He wrote a letter to him and told him how badly he wanted to see him. And then again, it could be Berea because it was the last major church on his way to Corinth. We don't know which. Some say they do, they don't. It's a guess. It's the best you can do is a guess. I can't find anything in history to point out where Paul was at when he wrote that letter. He goes on in 2 Corinthians to say, nevertheless, God who comforts the downcast, he comforted us by the coming of Titus. At least this much is off his plate. And not only by Titus's coming, but also by the consolation with which he was comforted in you. You made him feel good about the situation there at Corinth. When he told us of your earnest desire, your mourning, your zeal for me, so that I rejoiced even more. Paul was concerned as to whether or not he'd survive his trip to Corinth, and now he's discovered that the bulk of the church, it would appear, was with Paul. They still trusted in Paul as apostle to the Gentiles. They believed he was God's representative, and they only wanted good for him. So if he goes to Corinth and the false teachers try to stir up a stink, it ain't going to fly because the bulk of the congregation is going to protect him from any kind of assaults. So he's feeling better. He's feeling better about Timothy. He's feeling better now about Titus. He's feeling better about the state of the church at Corinth, and he's feeling better about his trip to Corinth. Where did Titus and Paul meet up? I don't know. It was in Macedonia. I know that much, but that's as much as I can give you. Moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia. Now, Paul is going through Macedonia, and he's taking up a collection for the churches of Judea. And he's telling them about the grace that he's seen in the heart of the Macedonians. He said they gave what they could, and they gave beyond what they could. He talks about the generosity of the Macedonians, how desirous they were to help out fellow Christians, even in another part of the world. And he was so uplifted, and he was so blown away by their gracious spirits. And he wrote about it in chapters 8 and 9. And you stop and think now, Paul is going through Macedonia, and he wants to tell them about the generosity of the Macedonians. Would you suppose that as far as Paul has gotten at this point is Philippi, the first city? And Macedonia is a pretty good-sized place. How far had Paul gone before he started commenting on the generosity of the Macedonians? Personally, I would think that he had been to several of the churches, and he had noted the grace of these churches. And because he had seen this grace, it's possible, at least in my mind, that Paul could have been to Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea. And he may have even gone back to Thessalonica and spent a little time there like he wants to do, and taken the time to write 2 Corinthians. So if I have to give a vote, I'll give my vote that Paul wrote 2 Corinthians in the city of Thessalonica in the latter part of the year 57 AD. And I think it's pretty solid, all except for Thessalonica, because it could have been anywhere. But I don't know, I may have something about his desire to go to Thessalonica in this presentation. I'm not sure. He goes on in chapter 9 of 2 Corinthians. Now, concerning the ministering to the saints, it is superfluous for me to write to you, for I know your willingness, speaking to the Corinthians, I know your willingness, about which I boast of you to the Macedonians. The Macedonians are very generous, and Paul's saying the Corinthians are that way too. Oh, their desire, they started collecting a year ago. They are ready to give money for the poor saints in Judea. Achaia, he said, was ready a year ago to give up their funds. And your zeal, your grace here in Macedonia, or the Corinthians, has stirred up the majority of people. They've gotten everybody excited. They've seen they've heard what Corinth is going to do, and they've decided that they want to be a part of this as well. And so Paul's complimenting them on what their example has done for the entire Macedonian community. So Paul, we know, wrote 2 Corinthians in the latter part of the year 57, somewhere in Macedonia. I cast my vote for Thessalonica, but I got to be honest with you, there's another big chunk of me that wants to believe he wrote it from Berea. So I don't know. You can think what you need to, but if I'm wrong, it's okay. It's okay. Lord won't hold that against me. He knows I'm ignorant. Moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia. What am I doing this for? We done went through all that, didn't we? Am I going backwards? Ooh. There's a Thessalonian letter. This is before he went to Thessalonica. This letter was likely written while he was at Ephesus. For we, brethren, but we, brethren, having been taken away from you for a short time in presence, not in heart, endeavored more eagerly to see your face with great desire. Therefore, we wanted to come to you, even I, Paul, time and again, but Satan hindered us. I just couldn't get there. For what is our hope or joy, a crown of rejoicing? Is it not even you in the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ that is coming? For you are our glory and joy. This is the only church I know of that Paul ever said something like that to. The image you might draw in your mind that Paul had was his joy, his crown of accomplishment was going to be getting to heaven and seeing the Thessalonians there. He had a special love for these people that appears to transcend the love he demonstrated toward any other church. I don't know why. We don't know much about him. We don't talk about him a whole lot. But Paul had a great admiration for these people and made mention of them, I think exclusively, as being a group he longed to see when he arrived in heaven. But they were very, very important to him. The generosity of the Macedonians. And they gave, not only as we hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord. That was the key to successful giving. It's not about counting out your dollars, it's about counting out yourself. You know, if you give yourself to the Lord, that's the key to success in every facet of Christian living. Giving yourself to the Lord totally, completely, entirely. It's a very hard thing to do because our lack of faith makes it difficult. All of us have a lack of faith, whether we want to admit it or not, we do. Faith is a relative thing on a scale of 1 to 100, and we're somewhere on that line, but we're not at 100. And this lack of faith, of course, causes us to battle ourselves. And the outcome of the battle is going to be determined very much by how much of me belongs to Jesus Christ. If he has me in abundance, then my performance will also be in abundance, because what's mine is his. And it would be something I would just not need to do, but something I would want to do because it would make the Lord happy. So the key is giving ourselves first to the Lord, and then after that, everything takes care of itself. Statements like that have gotten me in a lot of trouble through the years. I remember one time Brother Loftus, I forgot his name, Joe Loftus, he said, "Can you give me an easy summary of Christian living?" I said, "I think so." So I quoted what Jesus said about the first and second commandment. Love the Lord God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commands hang all the law and the prophets. I said, if you can do those two things, you're going to go to heaven. And he went and told some people what he had learned, and boy, was I in trouble. I caught all kinds of flack over that one. But I still say it today. It's still true. You can summarize many things in a very simple fashion, and I think we should when it's possible. It's just like this. If you first give yourself to the Lord, everything else will take care of itself. You're not going to know everything. You're going to be wrong sometimes, but that'll get straightened out along the way. That'll get corrected. The main thing is that he owns your heart. And when he owns your heart, he got the rest of you too. That's the hard part to give, though. They first gave themselves to the Lord, and then they gave to us by the will of God. So we urge Titus that as he had begun, so he would also complete this grace in you as well. Apparently, Paul sent Titus back to Corinth to get him ready for his arrival. One of the things Paul didn't want to happen is he's going to take some of the Macedonians with him. There was some from Ephesus, some from the Macedonian church. They're carrying a lot of money. So he's getting some of these guys from the various churches so they can go and see with their own eyes exactly what comes of their money. So he's going to come down to Corinth. All these guys are going to be with him, and he doesn't want the Corinthians not to be ready. So he sent Titus ahead. And one of Titus's responsibilities was to make sure that when Paul arrived, the collection was there. It was taken up. That all Paul would have to do is come, and he would be able to take the funds and go on his way, if that's what he had to do. And he didn't want to be put to shame in front of all these brethren. He bragged on the Corinthians so much that he didn't want to be put to shame because they were ill prepared when he arrived. So that's Titus's new job. Go to Corinth and make sure they're ready. Thanks be to God who puts the same earnest care for you into the heart of Titus as I have, he's implying. For he not only accepted the exhortation I asked him to go, but being even more diligent, he went to you of his own accord. He wanted to do it, okay? Paul didn't order him to do it. Well, he did, but the thing is, Titus wanted to go himself, even if Paul hadn't have ordered it. So everything's changed towards Paul's attitude towards Corinth during this Macedonian trip. Yet I have sent the brethren, lest our boasting of you should be in vain, that's what I was talking about a moment ago, in this respect, that as I said, you may be ready, lest if some of the Macedonians come with me and find you unprepared, we, not to mention you, should be ashamed of this confident boasting. Therefore I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren to go to you ahead of time, prepare your generous gift beforehand, which you had previously promised, that it may be ready as a matter of generosity and not as a grudging obligation. It would be very impressive if the funds going to Judea were sitting there waiting for Paul when he arrived. And this is what he hoped to see. So Paul has sent Titus down to Corinth, and he's carrying 2 Corinthians with him. So that's how the 2 Corinthian letter would have gotten down there. In Acts 20 it says, now when Paul had gone over that region, that's Macedonia, encouraged them with many words, he came down to Greece and stayed 3 months while he was there. Now, did Paul go to Athens? I don't know. He may have stopped at a few places, but I would say the bulk of his time in Greece was spent in Corinth because he had a church to clean up. There were a lot of those false teachers. Some of them probably disappeared when Paul was getting close to arriving, and some of them may have stayed and wanted to fight it out. Whatever the case would have been, Paul, I think, I would have been at least eager to get to Corinth and remove them people from the church so they couldn't keep on starting more trouble. So I'm actually transferring my feelings to Paul. At any rate, he couldn't go back to Syria this time of year because it's going to be late in the year, winter time, and he's going to have to winter somewhere, so he might as well winter in Corinth as anyway. And that would leave him there until he might push out in the early part of the year 58 and head back towards home. I believe that this is when Paul wrote the Roman letter in the spring of 58 while he was at Corinth. And I think that's provable by the contents of the Roman letter itself. In Romans 15, verses 25 and 6, Paul said, "But now I am going to Jerusalem to minister to the saints." Well, where was he when he was fixing to go to Jerusalem? He was in Greece. We know he was in Greece. For it pleased those from Macedonia and Achaia to make a certain contribution for the poor among the saints who are in Jerusalem. I've got to go to Jerusalem first. And then, therefore, when I have performed this, delivering the money, and have sealed them this fruit, I shall go by way of you to Spain. I'll go to Rome. He'd never been to Rome yet. And by the year 58, Paul had not been to Rome. I'll go to Rome, and then I'll go from there on to Spain. When these things were accomplished, Paul purposed in the Spirit, when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, to go to Jerusalem, saying, after I've been there, I must also see Rome. There's a couple other points that indicate as much. Romans 16:23, he refers to Gaius, my host. And we know that Gaius was a member of the church at Corinth. He was hosting Paul. Paul was staying in his house, and Gaius lived in Corinth. Erastus was the treasurer of the city. Paul said, he greets you. Wherever he was, Erastus was there with him, and he sends his greetings to you at Rome. And we learned that Erastus stayed in Corinth, but Trophimus had been left in Miletus sick when Paul wrote to Timothy. And then Paul left Corinth, and things went haywire again. No doubt he planned on leaving Corinth and going straight to Jerusalem. Okay, the straight shot would be the best shot, but he couldn't go that way. They had all the docks where they would have parted on a ship. They had all them sealed off, and he couldn't get to them. So Paul had to go back around all the way up through Macedonia and back down. He came to the city of Miletus. You remember in Acts 20, he called for the elders at Ephesus. He didn't want to go to Ephesus because if he went there, it was going to take too much time before he could get out. And he had to hurry up and get to Jerusalem. So he went to Miletus. He called for the elders of the church at Ephesus. They came and met with him. We have the meeting recorded in Acts 20 between Paul and the Ephesian elders. And from there, he left and he went on to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, Paul crossed the sea. He landed at Tyre, went to Ptolemy, went to Caesarea, went to Jerusalem. Then he went back down to Caesarea. He was a prisoner at this time, arrested in Jerusalem. They took him down to Caesarea to keep him safe. He stayed for 2 years. And then he headed out, finally, to Rome. If the Lord wills, I'll show up, Paul always said. Because he didn't know what was going to happen. He knew what he wanted to do, but he didn't know if the Lord had the same mind he did. So everything had to be conditioned on the will of God. So we have Paul going to Rome. He traveled up to the city as a prisoner. He stayed there for 2 years. When he got out, this is based on what he had said previously, he went to Spain. And you can tell Spain's a very large territory. We know that he was in, well, I shouldn't say we know. Historical data demonstrates that Paul was on the western portion of Spain, which means he was out in the ocean. And he met with certain churches in that particular area. Anyway, he made it to Spain. Did he ever come back to Jerusalem? I don't know. He may have come back to Rome, may have been rearrested, and this time, of course, there's no record of it, but this time he was put to death by Nero. And I'm done.